When I was in my 20s, I was troubled by something, a big puzzle. To understand this puzzle, I have to tell you what I did in my 20s. When I was in college, I decided to be a musician. That was the beginning of the 1990s. American music suddenly flooded in for people like me who didn't enjoy Chinese music. American music opened a new world. I wanted to be a rock star. After college, I started my band in Beijing. Years later, I failed. The band was gone, and I accomplished pretty much nothing. Not enough music talent, I guess. That was what happened in my 20s. You might say, okay, that's a cute little story, but where's the puzzle? Here's the puzzle. You see, I began to listen to Western music ever since high school. At first, the classic music, then pop music, then rock music, then metal, punk, you name it. I listened to everything. Eventually, I settled down with alternative rock. And I stopped listening pretty much any other genres. My band also only worked on alternative rock. But here's the trouble. Very few people in China enjoy this genre. For most Chinese, there are only two music categories, pop music and weird music. Rock, metal, punk, blues, jazz all belong to the weird music category. Alternative rock definitely is weird music. So when I was wondering, even if my band were as good as Radiohead, I would still have no chance to be rich and famous. Very few people in China know what Radiohead is, let alone enjoy their music. The fact is, only a tiny amount of Chinese really enjoy Western music. In China, most people only like Chinese pop music made by musicians in mainland China, Taiwan, or Hong Kong. And the pop music is dominating the market. Most Chinese have no idea what's the difference between metal and punk, or blues and jazz. When they hear metal, they call it heavy or tough music. When they hear jazz, they call it slow music. Most Chinese have no concept of music genres at all, and nothing has changed for decades. So here's the puzzle. Why? I think the answer very likely lies in geography. When you compare the map of China and the map of Europe, you notice that the obvious difference, the coastline in China is so smooth. But Europe, the coastline couldn't be more convoluted. Peninsulas are everywhere. And the peninsulas are always huge barriers for human interactions, cultural exchanges, wars, migrations. So you can see China's territory is wide open for unification. There's no decisive barriers. Of course, it doesn't mean unification is predetermined in China. It's just more likely to happen. So while Europe has never been unified for thousands of years, even Romans failed to accomplish that. China, on the other hand, was successfully unified 2,200 years ago. The Qing dynasty not only unified China, it also fortified China for the further reunification by erasing everyone's past. This is important because people back then had different identities. Before the unification, China was cut into small pieces, and the warlords had been fighting each other for hundreds of years. That was long enough for people to build up their own identity. So after unifying China, Qin Shi Huang ordered to burn all the books. By doing that, he reset everyone's history and reset China's history. Everyone's past was erased. Qin Shi Huang made himself the beginning of everything. He literally called himself the first emperor, so China had a very strong beginning with the Qing dynasty. After Qin Shi Huang died, his empire died with him, but China was quickly reunified by Liu Bang. He established the Han dynasty, which lasted over 400 years. You might think that 400 years is enough to clean the slate, so all the Chinese would share a same identity. After all, the majority of Chinese are called Han Chinese because of the Han dynasty. But that was not what happened. After the Han dynasty ended, China entered an age quite similar to Middle Ages in Europe, only it didn't last that long. China was cut into small pieces, and the civil war saw no ends again. But the most noteworthy feature of this chaotic age is that lots of nomads from the north merged into China. and eventually became Chinese. So this age is crucial for the development of Chinese culture. Chinese culture built up a special power of assimilation. For the next thousands of years, everyone who came here will be absorbed and disappear in China. Chinese slowly created an identity that wasn't based on ancestry, religion, nationality, or race. Instead, it's based on the morality that most people would agree upon. So when this age finally ended about 1400 years ago, China entered a loop. First, China would be unified. The unification would last for a while, sometimes a few decades, sometimes a few hundred years. Then the unification would age and die, and China would enter a short period of chaos. Then everything would be repeated. That was what happened for the next 1400 years. The Sui dynasty, Tang dynasty, Song, Yuan, Ming, and the Qing dynasty. During or after a dynasty, a huge amount of new people would emerge into China and became Chinese. Regardless of their background, China absorbed them all effortlessly. And they live in China peacefully ever since. Some kept their ethnicities, some turned into Han Chinese. So how does this solve my problem? Well, we have to check out what happened in Europe. Europe didn't went through this process. No one has ever unified the entire Europe. Europe was always cut into small pieces. But like what happened in China, people also moved around and mixed with each other for thousands of years. But unlike what happened in China, there was no unification. So Europeans needed identities, otherwise they couldn't tell who was one of us and who wasn't one of us. Chinese didn't have to worry about this because the country was big enough for everyone, and it was always unified. So for Chinese, the concept of a border between nations was very weak or didn't exist at all. Chinese didn't have the concept of a nation. For thousands of years, Chinese used another concept, 天下, to define the place where they lived, which means under the sky, or better yet, where the sky covers. China wasn't a nation. China was the whole world. All the people were divided into two categories, Chinese and the foreigners. Chinese are the people who live in where the sky covers, and the foreigners live at the edge of the world. But Europeans live in a very different situation. Walking a few steps, you would enter another kingdom, which had another king. People probably spoke different language, or they could even be hostile to people from your kingdom. Yet, they looked just like you. So I think for thousands of years, an identity became a necessity for most Europeans. Languages, traditions, cultures were good, but not enough. More identities were needed. So Europeans tended to create even more ways to identify themselves. That's the reason why Europeans have never stopped creating new ideas, new philosophies, new concepts, new ideologies, venture into new areas which eventually led to modern science and the global exploration. People needed to do something different to have a distinctive label. Nowadays, music genres are just a product of this mentality. Music genres are used as identities. Metal music lovers never listen to punk. Punk lovers look like the whole world betrayed them. Classic music lovers feel superior for their fine taste of music. Hip-hop lovers behave like gangsters. Alternative rock lovers always pretend they are alone in the world. At least that was how I behaved when I was young. And for people who don't want to use music as labels, there are more choices. Art, movies, political opinions, ideologies, religions, outfits, hairstyles, facial decorations, all could be used as identities. Some people even use vegetarian as a label, or more extremely, veganism. The list is endless. On the other hand, in China, no new ideas for 2,500 years, ever since the time when Confucius lived. You'll be surprised, but that's the truth. No new philosophies, no new ideologies, just no new ideas. But back to when Confucius lived, China had a boom of philosophers. Dozens of schools competed with each other. Then China was unified, and no more new ideas. The centralized political system created by Qin Shi Huang has lasted for 2,200 years until today. It hasn't changed that much. Chinese calligraphy, Chinese painting, Chinese music, Chinese standardized test, Confucianism, of course, Taoism, chopsticks, or even games like Weiqi haven't changed that much for thousands of years. That's the reason Chinese can easily trace their history back to thousands of years ago. This phenomenon could be strange to Westerners. Lots of Chinese actually hate it. But I'm going to talk about what this phenomenon really means to us in the later chapters. In these chapters, let's focus on what it is. The smooth geography is only one side of the story. Chinese people's collective personalities also made unification easier. They had less trouble working in a gigantic team, even if it means your distinctiveness will be diminished. I'm not a typical Chinese. I needed identity when I was young. I needed something to label myself as something different. That's why I have a tattoo on my face. But people like me are very rare in China. Most Chinese are not enthusiastic about being different. They don't care. Instead, they are always calling Chinese to 团结, which is difficult to translate into English. English word unite cannot fully deliver the meaning. The word 团结 means that people should come together, work together, and aim to the same goal. But there's a meaning that is hidden. This word 团结 also requires people to forget about their distinctivenesses, to stay on the same page with others. For Westerners, this could be a little scary, especially for those who grew up in an environment with a strong individualism. But Chinese chose this culture for a good reason. You see, unlike Europeans, Chinese always had another option. China definitely could have evolved like Europe. The territory was cut into small pieces, so the ocean effect would be minimized. Actually, 2,200 years ago, that was exactly how China was. China called it the age of warring states. The warlords in China kept fighting each other for hundreds of years. People were suffering. That was the reason many philosophers like Confucius stood up and tried to build a better system and stop the endless wars. When Qin Shi Huang finally unified China, the age of warring states finally ended. Later, the Han Dynasty lasted 400 years. It was peaceful 400 years largely. But Europeans didn't have this option. Europe was never fully unified. As a result, Europe was always on war. The World War I and the World War II were called world wars, but they were factually European wars. After 70 years today, Europe is on war again. And instead of preventing another big war, European countries are excitingly pushing Europe into it. Chinese, on the other hand, have less trouble suppressing their distinctivenesses for the sake of internal harmony. So China won't be split into small pieces and begin fighting each other. Suppressing their distinctivenesses is the price Chinese are willing to pay for peace and prosperity. And indeed, when China is in peace, it always prospers. Chinese historians recognize 3 golden ages in China. One happened during the Han Dynasty, one during the Tang Dynasty, and one during the Qing Dynasty. Even though historians don't recognize golden ages in other dynasties, don't be fooled by that. Every time when China is unified and in peace, it always blossoms. So let me just tell you what people did in the Ming Dynasty. Remember, historians don't recognize a golden age in the Ming Dynasty. In 1492, Columbus set sail for his transatlantic expeditions. But do you know, 87 years earlier, in 1405, the Ming Empire also did a similar thing. Only instead of 3 miserable ships, the Ming Empire built a fleet with 200 ships, and over 27,000 people served in the fleet. The biggest ship could carry 1,000 people. There were soldiers, sailors, diplomats, translators, carpenters, blacksmiths, cooks, physicians, etc. It wasn't a fleet. It was a functional city floating on the ocean. And the Ming Empire accomplished expeditions 7 times. If historians still don't recognize a golden age in the Ming Dynasty after what they accomplished, imagine what a golden age looked like in China. So you say Chinese definitely could have chosen to split their giant territory into small pieces and fight each other. But when you let people choose, they always choose peace. That's the reason Chinese would do anything to unify their country, so people could live in peace. Even if it means to diminish the ocean effect, everybody has to suppress their distinctivenesses, everybody has to be more similar to each other, and the culture could be a little more monotonous. What can I say? There's no perfect system. You want to be good at everything, you end up being good at nothing.